All right, so the next piece of middleware that we're going to take a look at here is our user email is verified middleware. And what we can do is just open up our Express middleware with that similar name. And we're basically going to encapsulate this logic in our user email is verified utility function. And this one's actually going to be really simple enough where it makes us question a little bit whether or not it's really worth our time to create a utility function for it, because essentially all we're going to do, as you'll see, I'm just going to copy and paste this function into user email is verified. And what we're going to do, we're just going to change the name to user email is verified. And what this is going to do is take a user as an argument, and it's simply going to return the condition inside this if statement. We're going to say return user and user.email is verified. And actually, we don't even need that first part either. We're just going to return user.email verified. So again, this is a little bit simpler than you might have expected, and it might make you question whether or not it's worth it. Really, at the end of the day, it's up to you, but personally, I think that it's well worth it because there may well be a point in the future when we want to change how we're storing the email verified, right? And it might require something like loading data from our database or maybe even making a network request to a third-party API. So anyway, putting this logic inside its own function like we're doing here makes it so that those kind of changes would be relatively painless, right? We would just have to write them once and know that they would work just the same way as this here. So anyway, now that we have that utility function, let's go back to our Express middleware and swap that out. Basically, all we're going to do is we're going to change this to if request.user, and then we're going to import the user email is verified function we just created. Okay, there we go. And we're just going to say if request.user and user email is verified. Oops, there we go. And we're going to pass request.user to that function. And that's pretty much it, right? Like that's the only change that we had to make there. So pretty simple. Let's go see what it's like to create a similar middleware for our WebSockets. So inside Sockets middleware, what we're going to do is copy and paste the Express middleware file into there, right? User email is verified. And what we're going to do for this one is, first of all, of course, we're going to change this request response next thing to just a socket, since our socket.io middleware just takes a socket as an argument. And what it's going to do, again, it's going to check whether the user email is verified in a similar way, right, using this function, but instead of request.user, it's going to be socket.user, and this is going to be socket.user as well. And if the user's email is verified, then instead of just calling next, we're going to say return true. Otherwise, we're going to emit an event. We're going to say socket.emit error. And we're going to have this say something like user email not verified. Okay, and then we're going to return false, signifying that everything did not go well and that we should not proceed. And that actually reminds me that back in our user can edit note middleware, we didn't actually emit an error if can edit is false, which we do want to do, by the way. So what we'll do is we'll actually change this back to an if statement. All right, so we'll say if can edit, then return true. Otherwise, we want to emit an error. We're going to say socket.emit error. And we'll say something like user does not have edit permission. Okay. And then, of course, we'll return false. So again, we're just returning an error here, and we're returning false, and that's it. So we'll get that out of there now and go back to user email is verified middleware. That one, I think that one's actually completed. So we should be good there, and let's actually move on to the next piece of middleware here, which is going to be, hang on just a minute here, that's going to be user owns note. So again, this is going to encapsulate the logic inside the user owns note Express middleware that doesn't have anything to do with Express, and that's basically going to be this stuff here. So we're going to just take this whole function here, and we're going to paste it in here. We're going to change the name to user owns note, and we're going to remove the Express specific logic. So basically what this is going to do is, just like with user can edit note, it's just going to take the user ID and the note ID as arguments, and then it's going to use those to return either true or false, depending on the answer to this question here, right? Whether the user owns the note. So all we need to do really is, instead of having an if statement and response.sendStatus, we're going to just say return note.createdBy is equal to authUser.uid. And actually, that won't be authUser.uid. That'll be just plain old user ID. All right, and then the rest of the stuff down here, we can get rid of it. All this thing is doing is returning true or false depending on whether or not the user owns a note, which is really all that a utility function like this should do anyway. Cool. So now that we've separated that logic out into its own function again, what we're going to do is go back to the Express middleware and use that function. So let's import our user owns note function. And what we're going to do here is we're just going to say const is owner equals user owns note, and we're going to pass the user ID and note ID in as arguments here. So we'll say auth user dot uid and the note ID as well. And we're going to need to actually add await. I'm worried that I might have forgotten that in other ones, so I'll go back and check in just a minute. So we're going to say await user owns note, and basically we're just going to replace this logic here with that. We're going to say if not is owner, then blah, blah, blah. And we are setting request.note here, so we actually are going to want to load that note from the database here, so we'll just paste that right there. And that should make that work just like we want it to. So anyway, that's how the Express middleware is going to look. Let's head over now to our socket middleware and see if we can't do the same thing. We're just going to copy this file here and paste it inside sockets middleware. And then what we're going to do, of course, is change this to socket. And we're going to change this from request.user to socket.user. Same thing here, socket.params. Then we're getting whether or not the user owns the note in just the same way. And if the user is not the owner, this is going to look a little differently. So what we're going to do essentially, let's change this to if user is owner. We're just going to return true. It's pretty boring in that case since we don't actually want to load the note and set it on the socket like we did with Express with the request. So we can remove that, remove this. And what we're going to do instead is if the user is not the owner, we're going to emit an event. We'll say emit error. And the message here will be user does not own note. Okay, and then we'll just return false like we did in our other socket middleware, and that will tell our server.js file that it shouldn't go any further there. So we can also remove this notesDB thing here. We don't need that anymore. We're not doing any actual loading of data from the database inside this middleware. We're just doing that inside this user owns note utility function. Awesome. So that should be all we really need to do. All I wanted to do now is just go back and spot check to make sure that we actually said await in the right places, and it looks like we didn't. Not that user email is verified really needs it, but just in case in the future we were to add that, I'm just going to say await since we did, I believe, leave the async keyword on that utility function. All right, yep, so that one's, we just marked it as async even though it's not, just to make it fit in with the other utility functions. And let's see, what about user can edit note? Yep, that one's got it. Load auth user from token, that one's got it as well. Let's make sure in here as well. User owns note, we're going to have to add that there as well. And there we go. Cool, so it looks like everything is working just the way we want it to. Let's just try running our application. Not that we're actually using these pieces of middleware yet, but just to make sure there's no syntax errors or anything, we're going to say npm run dev. And we should see server is listening on port 8080, and our app should come up if we let it run. Cool, so it looks like everything's working so far, and we've created all of the middleware that we're going to need for our sockets for the time being. So I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.